Hello and welcome back to the Alchemical Arts. Today is a little bit of a different announcement rather than a regular episode. Today I am launching or releasing my first set of paints. It's been a long sort of journey working towards this, and if you've been watching through, I've been exploring and making a whole bunch of pigments. And you know, a little while back I came to the realization of what would I like to do with the pigments that I'm making, and how could I best get it out to the general public and to artists so that they can actually use the results of my exploration, essentially. And so what I've come up with, or what I've been working at for maybe the last 6 months or so and trying to turn into a proper business, is I've been turning the pigments into watercolor paints. And so I've designed essentially a little watercolor set here, which I've been working on for a while now. And I feel like it's a good little representation of an array of the colors that I've been producing, and is a very easy and accessible way for people to start painting with the pigments that I've been making. So essentially the watercolor set is a 5-color set right here with 5 little half pans of pigment prepared as watercolors. And we've got, in terms of in the set, we've got a cad yellow, we've got a chromium cobalt green, we've got a cobalt blue, a burnt ochre, and the madder lake. So that gives you a good sort of array of, you know, a yellow, a green, a blue, a browny earth tone, and a red. Although the madder lake is sort of a pink red, but yes, it still sort of covers that basic sort of palette, but in an interesting manner, because each one of these colors is quite unique in the way it handles, and you know, has their own properties that they bring to the set. The set also comes in these little cloth hinged magnet boxes that I've been producing as well. I've been working very hard at producing a whole ton of these boxes, which I've got lots of recycled timber around that I've been using to produce them. And so they work really well as a travel case as well, so the paints sit in there nicely, doesn't fall open because it's got a strong magnet to hinge it together, so, and it's quite small. I'll do a little close-up of the set in just a second. But yeah, essentially I have been finding a lot of joy in turning the pigments into watercolors. So I'm using a very simple gum arabic based binder with honey and glycerin, keeping everything very basic in the ingredients that go in to allow the pigments their own sort of light so that they can shine through, so you get the best representation of the pigments themselves, so there's no additional additives to the binder and stuff like that, keeping it to the very traditional method, which seems to be the theme here, keeping things as traditional as possible. Okay, so coming into the close-up here, essentially this is what the set looks like as you would get it. So it's just got a little information label wrapped around the outside of the box, which has color swatches, which have just been painted onto watercolor paper and popped on there. We've got a little bit of a philosophy rundown and practice rundown, which if you're familiar with the channel, you'll pretty much know where I'm coming from and why I'm doing these things. We have a little bit of an ingredients list here and so forth. And then essentially if you were to slide this label off and have a look inside, this is what you would get, which is just your 5 little colors in here that are wrapped in a foil with an individual label to tell you what the color is. And then if you take that one step further and unwrap each of the colors, you'll end up with this, which is the 5-color palette here, and your little half pans of pigment. This is the one that I've been carrying around with me lately to test its durability, its travel, what it's like to travel with it, and just been painting from it myself, because I'm not the most adept watercolor painter, but I certainly am working up to learning, and obviously making watercolors has forced me to learn a lot about watercolor painting, which has been really good for my own sort of artistic development. The boxes themselves are just a simple cloth hinge box with a magnet, like a rare earth magnet here, so you've got a strong, so it doesn't really want to open. And these particular boxes are a Tasmanian oak with a contrasting wood here, which I'm not sure what this wood is. due to the fact that all of these boxes are being produced out of recycled timbers, because I'm a bit of a timber hoarder. So it's been nice finally putting some of the pieces of wood that I've got around to use, and it's also been nice getting back to woodworking. And I thought this was a nice simple little design that worked both as a traveling case and as a nice display case in which to sell the paints in. I didn't really want to opt for just your standard metal tin or a plastic tin or buy even in a wood box, because I feel like if I'm going to the effort of hand making the pigments, I'm going to the effort of hand grinding them into the paints, I'm making my own binder, why not make my own box? That way it gives the entire product a 100% handmade sort of quality. It allows me to keep everything in-house and produce and make everything myself, which I think, you know, I don't know, these days is an important thing. So many products are mass-produced and impersonal, and something about the personal touch, especially when it's related to art materials, has always been a strong philosophy of mine. So anyway, let's grab ourselves some paper and we'll start doing some painting with these, so that you get a feel for what the colours look like and how the paint's wet. So just coming in here, we've just got a little piece of watercolour paper and my palette, some water, and let's start with the blue down this end here. So we'll grab this out. You can use them directly from in there, but it's easier for demonstration. I'll just pop this out here, get a bit of water. The cobalt blue is a very easy pigment to wet, and it's very strong in colour. So we'll just wet up a sort of stronger amount here, and we'll just do a little colour swatch over in the corner here so you can get a feel for it. Being a cobalt pigment, it's slightly granulating as well, and you just see it's that beautiful deep royal blue colour, which as we wet it out, it becomes nice, soft, gentle blue, which can be used for all sorts of sky colours and so forth. And I don't know, it's one of my favourite blues. I've been playing around with the Prussian blue as well, but my god, that's intense and difficult to deal with. So this is a very easy blue to work with. It's sort of can tint towards the green very well. It can also tint towards the purple very well. So it's sort of a very middle of the road blue. And see, we've already made a mess here, getting this everywhere. So let's move on to the cadmium yellow, which again, being a metal, inorganic metal based pigment, has a high tinting strength like the cobalt as well. It's got some pretty heavy particles which can also sink into the paper, and it's very bright. It's a very nice, rich, deep, bright cadmium yellow, which interestingly, so if I put on a very thick application, let's say at the front here, you get that sort of deeper sort of golden yellow, but as you start to dilute the cad, it becomes, it's so strong that it's really struggling to dilute. You see here, as you dilute it, it becomes lighter and sort of more, I guess, bright sort of daisy lemon yellows as you reduce, or if you increase the amount of water that goes into it. So again, tinting strength is huge with this pigment, so it can just really keep on going and going, and you really don't need much of it at all to start filling up a palette and working with it for quite some time, because it is very strong. Moving on to the ochre. So this gold, it's sort of a burnt umber, burnt ochre sort of colour. It's not as dark as your traditional burnt umbers, for example. It's certainly got a lot more warmth to it. being a sort of natural earth pigment too, it takes a little bit more wetting. It doesn't have as high a tinting strength as, say, the inorganic pigments, but it's still very rich in color, very chocolatey, very milk chocolatey sort of color. I've gone to great pains to sieve and reduce the particle size of the ochre, because if the ochres aren't prepared properly, the pigments, they end up becoming very, very granular and not granulating, just granular in the sense that you have all this sort of like silt sort of all through it, and it doesn't make for the painting experience to be the nicest. It's kind of like, you know, when you don't wash spinach properly and you get all that grit through your meal. It's the same thing with the ochres. If you don't go to the extra trouble of really processing them down fine, they get very gritty. But as you can see here, beautiful warm ochre color that washes out to nice soft browns and has that deep warmth. It sort of dries to a very pastel-y sort of color too. Next we have the chrome green, which is actually a cobalt chromium mixture. And again, like the cadmium and the cobalt, because it's an inorganic metal based pigment, it's very strong, it's very deep, and has incredibly high tinting strength. And I'm really happy with this color in the sense that it's not like your traditional chrome green. Because of that tiny amount of cobalt into it, you get these sort of subtle blue turquoisey elements to it, which will be very hard for the camera to pick up. But when you're actually painting with it, you sort of can see the effects that it has. So it has that ever so slight sort of seaweed, sea green element to it that just, I don't know, I'm really a fan of this sort of deeper greens but with these sort of blue undertones to them. And it's also a very heavy pigment, so it granulates a lot, and you get this sort of sinking into the paper of the pigment particles because there's a lot of weight to chromium and cobalts. And so again, it's very, I don't know, it's an interesting color that I've come across, and I'm really happy with it, and I'm going to keep making it for the foreseeable future. And then last but not least, we have the madder pigment. So the thing with the madder pigment, which I've been at great pains to sort of figure out over the last few months of trial and error and testing and stuff like that, is being a natural lake pigment. So because it's made from the root material of the madder plant, and because it's a lake, which means you take like essentially a dye, because that's what the madder plant produces, is a red dye, and then you attach that to some sort of inert base. So in this case it's like you use sodium carbonate or potassium carbonate. It takes a bit of time to get it wet, and I think that's just an inherent property in lake pigments in general. And like, I've tried combating that by adding extra glycerin and extra honey to make it like wet easier, because that's part of the use of the glycerin in the watercolor binder, is to help with the wetting of the pigments. And so as you can see here, it's a very translucent sort of crimsony red color with very strong pinky tones as well, which if you let it sort of, if you use a lot of water and then work it until you get a lot of pigment into the mix, you can get some very rich colors. But then you can also dilute it down a fair bit and get these soft pinky washes. So it's incredibly translucent. It will work very well for a lot of glazing and work like that. But it's definitely a paint where you have to put a little bit of work into it to get it to do what you want it to do. But again, a very unique, very beautiful color that I'm very happy with. And also a color that's fallen out of favor a lot, and that's due to the idea that it's fugitive, which means that it fades upon exposure to UV light. Now, I'm still in the process of doing my own testing on the color fastness of this, or the light fastness, but there are ways to make this last better and have a stronger life of color. And I'm hoping that the techniques I've used in making the matte pigment have actually resulted in a more light fast pigment, but only time will tell. It will take at least 6 months to a year's worth of testing to figure those things out. But nonetheless, if you want to use a genuine matte pigment, this is one of the few ways you can get it, because most companies have stopped producing genuine mattes. So as you can see here, this is the color range. I'm really happy with this little array of colors. I think it's interesting and unique. Well, that about does it for this sort of in-depth little look at the watercolor set that I'll be releasing this week. If you enjoy the look of this set and want to pick up one of them, just head on over to the Alchemical Arts Etsy store, which the link will be in the description for this video. And on the Etsy I'll have the sets available, as well as some of the individual colors from the sets, because over time, as I develop new colors and things like that, I would like to release different sets with different themes, or whether it's revolving around a particular time period, a particular color style, whether it's looking at blues or greens in particular, or a particular element like cobalt or chromium, and seeing the different kinds of pigments that could come out of that, so theming sets around that. I think one of the interesting things that I'll be able to do with this whole sort of watercolor paint making thing is that as I work through the videos on this channel, I can use this as sort of like a development journal, where you get to see the process going into my pigment development, and then I can launch those pigments as paints over the coming months and year or so forth as we go through the channel. So you'll be able to see what's coming in the works as I'm sort of going through my research and development process, which should be quite interesting. Huge thanks to everyone who's supported me this far. It's been really good to get the positive feedback that I've got on the channel and the pigments and so forth. Particular thanks to my Patreons, who have been very supportive and helpful. And yeah, I look forward to making more things and getting the things out there. And I think the real fundamental thing about what I'm doing here is I want to bring artists into that deeper relationship with their materials. Artists used to have such a rich, long history of relationship between artist and material, and the way that they worked and the way that each material handled itself and the kinds of arts that they could produce as a result of it. And in today's sort of age with, the mass production of things like that, most artists just go to their store, they buy the materials that they like, or they just buy whatever materials they can afford, and there's a certain element of impersonalness to that, and I guess I'm just trying to bring it back to that sort of personal, in-depth relationship between artist and art material, between the colors and the way that we reflect and experience the colors. So if you enjoyed, like and subscribe and check out my other videos and so forth, and there'll be plenty more coming in the future, but thank you for tuning in today.